is USNG, the U.S. National Grid System, which is essentially an addressing system for places off the grid or trail systems, less accessible places than just a house on a road. It goes off of the military system. And so anybody or most veterans are probably already familiar with the way it works. So it's somewhat approachable for the general public, and that helps. Instead of using a coordinate system based on longitude and latitude, USNG is based on a grid system using meters and kilometers that are overlaid on the Universal Transverse Mercator grid map projection. So it's meant to supplement but not replace addresses, which can be critical for locating people during search and rescue in areas that are just difficult to address. So why are we doing this in Bayfield County? Well, Bayfield County is pretty much known as a recreation destination. Tourism is a pretty big industry here. We have a ton of trails. Second biggest county in the state at 1,500 square miles almost. Big tourism industry. A lot of places for people to get lost out there, especially when you consider Lake Superior and 83% forest coverage throughout the county. And we've got hundreds of miles of recreation trails. So we've been in the process of implementing USNG. It's not at every trail system that we manage and that exists in the county, but a pretty good chunk of them at this point. I think we've got 11 trail systems signed with USNG signs. We have a total of 943 USNG points. 530 of the signs have been installed and 413 additional sign locations proposed. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of how it works. It's a grid system, and so you can see, you guys see my mouse? We are number 15 up here, up in this sliver. And then it breaks down even further, and they add a letter to that. And so that makes us 15T. And then we get 2 more letters, making us XM. And so that that second set of letters is to represent grid squares that are approximately 100 kilometers or 62 miles. And so pretty much all of Bayfield County and Ashland County is in this XM group. But as soon as you move into Douglas County or shortly after, it's a different one. And yeah, you can kind of see the way it's spread across the US here. So, but that's not close enough to find anyone, so it breaks down even further. So here's the way it looks written as a coordinate. That 15T is the grid zone designation. And then XM is the 100 kilometer square ID. And then after that, you've got two series of 5 numbers, which represent the easting coordinates and the northing coordinates. So often with USNG, it can be written with 5 digits on the easting and northing, but often we will truncate it to remove that 5th digit on each side, because when you only have 4 digits each, you can still get within 10 meters, which is probably close enough to find a missing person just by looking around. And so, yeah, this kind of goes into that. More digits equals more accuracy. If we were to have just 2 digits on each side, it would be 1,000 by 1,000 meters square. And then 3 digits is 100 by 100. And then 4 is 10 by 10, which is typically what we use, but some places will use the 5 digits to get a 1 by 1 meter square if you really want to zero in, depending on what you're looking for, I guess. A good way to remember how to read the easting and northing is to remember that the easting is positioning you along the x-axis of the grid, so how far east you are, and the northing is positioning you on the y-axis, so how far north you are. And so this is how that 5th digit is removed. You really want to be careful not to round, because if you round, it could push you into the next section. Whereas if you just truncate and just remove that 5th digit, it's a little more accurate. That's pretty important. So this is what the signs look like out in the field. As you can see, there's that 15T at the top up there, which is the area large enough. It covers most of Minnesota and Iowa and half the western half of Wisconsin. So honing you in, but not close enough. And then the WM represents that 100 kilometers squared that I showed earlier. And then there are your 4 digits, one on top of the other, 8 digits total, which gets you to a 33-foot accuracy, which is pretty good. So one of the challenges with implementation is communicating what all of this means to the general public. You know, they're going to see these signs out there and wonder what it means to them and how they use it. And also with dispatch, making sure dispatch understands, you know, what these coordinates are and how to communicate them to search and rescue. And I'll get into more on that later. But yeah, where are some good places to use this signage? We focus on trailheads and trail intersections, so places where people are most likely to see them, and also places where people are most likely to get into a situation where they need help, like an intersection where people might collide, or if there's like a really steep spot on a trail or a really moguly area, we'll put a sign there too. And then shelters, picnic areas, places like that, landmarks. And so typically I'll, you know, determine all of those locations. And then if there's a stretch of trail without anything like that, that's more than a half mile, we'll put them on long stretches of trail as well. Something to consider too. I know some places and even us in the past have gone every quarter mile on those long stretches, but it was starting to feel like too much visual clutter, and some of the trail managers didn't like all that visual clutter. You know, it's a blue sign in a green and brown or white wooded environment. So just being cognizant of that is important. So the implementation process. We organize within Bayfield County a we call it the USNG meeting or monthly trails group, where trail managers throughout the county and nearby counties like Douglas and Ashland and Sawyer County will come, and we just discuss projects that are ongoing, things that places where signs could be added, prioritize different trail needs, to just sort of brainstorm and decide where we can be putting these signs and where they'd be the most helpful. And from there, funding needs to be figured out. Typically, the trail management group funds the sign. Usually it's sort of like a private group. They fund the project, but the county helps. And that's where my role and Carmen's role comes in. And usually we will calculate the USNG coordinates for them and do any field work necessary in order to do that. So usually I'll bike the whole trail system if it's one that can be biked. and just use Survey 123, or you could use whatever it's called, Field Notes, I think, or Avenza, to just mark a waypoint at every location that you think needs it. Because certain danger spots, like, you're not going to know about that just by looking at a map. So I think the fieldwork component is pretty important. We've had a few systems that we mapped without a fieldwork component, and we're finding a few years later now that there's a lot of issues, or, intersections don't always line right up on the map where you think they are. And so, yeah, pretty important to have that fieldwork component. And then I take all those waypoints and put them into the computer, and often you still wind up with more than you need. So from there, I'll work and communicate back and forth with the trail manager to determine if we want to cut any less important locations, which ones are the most important, prioritize where the signs should go, especially when taking funding into consideration. So after that's all done, I'll make a map that shows every sign location with the truncated USNG coordinates. Usually I'll leave out that 15T XM part because everywhere in Bayfield County has that. And I'll just use those remaining 4 digits just so it's easy to read the map and figure out what's going on. And then from there, it is up to the trail group themselves to put the signs up. So sometimes they'll utilize volunteer help, or, sometimes the managers do it themselves and they put the signs up. And and then they order them as well. I skipped that step. So we had been recommending a private company who was great, but he's sort of phasing out and retiring his business. So we've started recommending the Bureau of Corrections, actually. It's like through the Wisconsin jail program, and inmates have a job creating signs. And so far, we've only seen one project with the BAC signs so far, but they look great, and it's a much lower price point than the other private companies. So that's been so far a success. So there's a few different versions of these signs. Depending on what type of trail system the signs are going on, there's recommendations for different sizes, which makes sense. The motorized trails have slightly bigger signs because, people are moving quicker, trying to maybe see them from a further distance away. Silent sports ones are smaller, 6 by 9 inches, and then trailheads are recommended to be the biggest of all. This is newer, I believe, these vertical versions of the signs. We haven't implemented them at all in Bayfield County as far as I know, but maybe something to look to in the future. Slightly less visual clutter. And so they're breakaway. I guess that's so if you run into them, you don't get hurt, versus a metal sign. So what have we done so far in Bayfield County? We started with silent sports trails, bike, hike, ski, snowshoe. We've worked together with at least 4, I think more than that now, different trail groups. Like I said earlier, about 530 signs installed so far on 8 trail systems. And we are just starting to get started on motorized trail systems. The first project is going to be down in Barnes on the snowmobile trails, and so it'll be interesting to see how that's received by a different sort of trail user group. But I think it's important that we get them on the motorized trails because, especially snowmobiling, you see a lot of accidents, and it could be very helpful. So I think a pretty important part of this process is, like I said earlier, the education component, so people even understand what the signs are about and how to use them. Trailheads are a good place for brochures or signage. This is what we have proposed. I don't believe any of our trail groups have put these info signs out yet, but CAMBA is hoping to do it soon. CAMBA is a mountain biking group. And so it's just a sign to show what they are, and another one that has a QR code that links to our website, which kind of breaks down more information about the signs and how to use them. So, one of the important parts of this process too is that accidents aren't going to always happen when you're, in line of sight of a sign. And who on earth is going to remember the coordinates that they passed most recently? So, a pretty important part of this process is the apps. So, there are a number of apps that you can use on your phone that'll tell you what your USNG coordinates are at anywhere. Often they don't need, most of them don't need access to phone service or Wi-Fi or anything like that. This is the USNG, like the main USNG app. This one is actually desktop based or browser based. And so you do have to, before you get out in the field, load it on your phone. But if you bookmark it, then when you go back later, it'll work. Like you don't have to have it pulled up and on your browser in that moment, as long as it's bookmarked in your home screen. Yeah, there are some challenges with the apps. Like some of them only work with Apple devices, some of them only work with Android devices. This one in particular works with both, but because it's browser based, you have to go ahead and set it up ahead of time. And then here are some other options. Esri has a USNG app, but unfortunately, as of now, it's only for the iPhone or other Apple products. Hopefully that changes in the future. And then there's a few options for Android. There's one, the MGRS and UTM app that works for both. But yeah, that middle web-based one is by far the simplest. Like you pull it up and that's what it looks like. It just has your coordinates minus the question marks. That's it. So it tells you exactly where you are. Avenza is another option, though I have been told that has anyone heard, is Avenza, I guess it's getting sold or a new company is taking over. So for now it works. I don't know how that'll look in the future. Maybe the new company will adopt all the same. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, in the next month you can use it and it's pretty easy to have it show the USNG coordinates. You just down at the bottom of the screen, you just click on the coordinate, just the coordinates themselves, and it'll pull up this side view, and you just pick the USNG one, and then it'll stay like that every time you open up the app. It'll still be in USNG mode. So yeah, maybe a good option for people who already have Avenza on their phone for the time being anyway. And then another important component is, like I said, the dispatch side of things. And so if dispatch wants to convert different styles of coordinates into USNG to then communicate that to first responder, emergency responders, there's a website called GIS Surfer, which does that really easily. You just like click on the location or type in the other formats of coordinates and it'll spit it out in USNG format. And so far in Bayfield County, USNG has been helpful in two different emergency situations. One was a hunter lost in the woods. And he just happened upon a sign, I think is what eventually he happened upon a sign and took a picture of it and sent it to someone who then sent it to first responders. And so he was able to be found. And then another situation was a mountain bike accident. And it just made it quicker. He was near a sign. The person involved was familiar with the sign system, and it just made for a quicker response time in order for them to get exactly where he was. Because, I mean, you think about some of these trails and where people might get hurt and go missing, and it's like, yeah, I'm at the big oak tree with the hole in it. How do you communicate where you're at, especially when, sometimes trail systems change the names of the trails often, or things aren't even named. So, yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, and hoping to have less accidents out in the woods thanks to this system.